York, this is Democracy Now!
We, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Protests have taken place across the country after a jury in Kenosha, Wisconsin, acquitted 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse on all 5 counts of fatally shooting 2 people and wounding a third during racial justice protests over the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. In a Democracy Now! Exclusive, we'll speak to Jacob Blake's father and his uncle.
Surprised because in this city, my nephew was shot 7 times in the back and no charges were ever leveled. You have to understand from day one, the judge had his hand on the scale. He didn't allow pictures. He didn't allow videotapes in. He didn't allow. He was doing everything he could to allow this young man to leave his courtroom clear and free.
Plus, we'll speak to a lawyer representing the family of Anthony Huber, one of the protesters shot dead by Kyle Rittenhouse. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Wisconsin, a jury found white gunman Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all counts. In August of last year, Rittenhouse traveled to Kenosha, Wisconsin during anti-police brutality protests where he shot and killed 2 people and wounded a third. Friday's verdict sparked demonstrations across the country. In a statement, the parents of Anthony Huber, one of the protesters killed by Rittenhouse, said they were heartbroken and angry and that the verdict, quote, sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, then use the danger they've created to justify shooting people in the street. This is Hannah Giddings, the partner of Anthony Huber.
Every day I wish that I could come home to him and unload some of this weight that's on my shoulders, but I can't because he's dead. And now the system is telling me that nobody needs to answer for that. And I have a problem with that. I think I've been very open in expressing my empathy for the other side of this, but that's just not reciprocated back.
Anthony Huber's partner, Hannah Giddings, was standing next to Justin Blake, the uncle of Jacob Blake, who was shot by police that sparked the protests against police brutality. We'll be speaking with Justin Blake and Jacob Blake's father, Jacob Blake, in a Democracy Now! Exclusive after headlines. 2 other closely watched trials continue today. In Georgia, closing arguments are being delivered in the murder trial of the 3 white men who chased down and fatally shot Ahmaud Arbery. And jurors in Charlottesville, Virginia, are deliberating for a second day in a civil trial against the organizers of the deadly Unite the Right rally. A New York man who pleaded guilty to the sexual assault of 4 teenage girls will avoid prison altogether after receiving an extraordinarily lenient sentence that's drawn international condemnation. Christopher Belter, who's now 20 years old, received 8 months probation and no jail time after he pleaded guilty to attempted first-degree sexual abuse, third-degree rape, and 2 counts of second-degree sexual abuse. One survivor was in the courtroom, told Buffalo news station WKBW she had to immediately run to the bathroom and throw up after Belter's sentencing Tuesday.
I lost it. I mean, I didn't expect to be as emotional as I was, but I just broke down. I was shaking with anger. I was disgusted at the fact that this was even an option.
The 4 teens who were raped were 15 and 16 years old. Belter, who is white, is from a wealthy neighborhood near Niagara Falls, New York. In Missouri, a white Kansas City police detective was found guilty Friday of fatally shooting a black man outside his own home in December 2019. Eric DeValkenaer was convicted on charges of second-degree involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action for firing 2 rounds at 26-year-old Cameron Lamb, who was killed as he backed his truck into his own garage. At the time, officers had no arrest warrant and no evidence of a crime. Civil rights attorney Lee Merritt represents Lamb's family.
This is momentous. This is historic, and it means something. This is going to mean something when you go back to Georgia. It's going to mean something for Ahmaud Arbery. It's going to mean something for Tatiana Jefferson. It's going to mean something for both Rajon. It's going to mean something for so many families that have been impacted. Jamel Roberson in Chicago, Ronald Green in Illinois. These instances of justice in our system are far too rare.
We'll have more on that story later in the broadcast. In Wisconsin, an SUV plowed through a Christmas parade in the town of Waukesha Sunday, killing at least 5 people and injuring at least another 40. Videos show the vehicle crashing through barriers and speeding down a road that had been blocked off for the parade. Police say they've detained a, quote, person of interest, but no cause or motive for the deadly incident has been revealed. Major protests against COVID restrictions took place over the weekend across Europe, where the coronavirus is once again surging. In Belgium, police deployed tear gas and water cannons as tens of thousands of people marched in the capital, Brussels, some of them throwing fireworks. In the Netherlands, police used batons, dogs, and horses to push back crowds in The Hague amidst 3 nights of rioting there and in other Dutch cities. Dozens were arrested in Rotterdam. In Austria, people rallied ahead of a full national lockdown starting today.
I want my freedom back. One would think we live in a democracy, but now this is a coronavirus dictatorship.
Protests also took place in Croatia, Italy, and outside of Europe, most notably in Australia. Here in the United States, the FDA and the CDC approved COVID-19 booster shots for all adults Friday. Health officials are urging U.S. residents to get a booster or to get their first vaccines if they haven't already in order to curb another winter surge as the holiday travel rush is expected to approach pre-pandemic levels. Cases have gone up nearly 30% over the last 2 weeks. Recorded U.S. COVID deaths in 2021 have now surpassed 2020 deaths despite the wide availability of vaccines. In Sudan, security forces shot dead a 16-year-old during anti-coup protests Sunday. The latest demonstration came as Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok was reinstated by the military coup government 1 month after they ousted him. Hamdok signed a power-sharing deal with the military that would last 3 to 4 years before new elections are held. This is a protester speaking yesterday from the capital, Khartoum.
Prime Minister Hamdok is in a position of weakness and isn't able to speak up about people's demands because he is staying with the military leader Burhan in the same place. He can't tell him that he's a killer and he must be tried. But we want politicians who can bring us out of this mess, who don't want any more bloodshed. We want a civilian state without any more violence or escalation.
At least 41 people have been killed and hundreds injured in protests since the October 25th coup. In China, tennis star Peng Shuai appears to have resurfaced over the weekend amidst mounting concerns for her safety. The 35-year-old Olympian tennis player accused former Vice Premier Zhang Guoli of sexual assault in a social media post November 2nd and has not been seen since. International Olympic Committee President Thomas Bach said he held a video call with Peng, while Chinese state media released a series of photos photos and videos showing the athlete in various settings, including a children's tennis competition. In a statement, the head of the Women's Tennis Association said, quote, "While it is positive to see her, it remains unclear if she is free and able to make decisions and take actions on her own without coercion or external interference." International outcry is growing. China cares deeply about this because the Olympics are taking place in China within 2 months. In Chile, 2 presidential candidates, a far-right populist and a former student protest leader, will face off in a runoff election next month after neither candidate received enough votes Sunday to declare victory. With more than 90% of ballots counted, far-right presidential hopeful José Antonio Cast appeared to lead in the first round. Cast opposes abortion and marriage equality and ran a campaign on anti-immigration rhetoric. He's also an apologist for the former U.S.-backed Pinochet dictatorship. Meanwhile, Gabriel Boric is a 35-year-old former student activist who supports progressive social reforms and an overhaul of neoliberal economic policies. Venezuelans also took to the polls Sunday for regional elections, where President Nicolás Maduro's political party and its allies won by a landslide. The elections had a turnout of around 42%. Opposition parties participated for the first time in 4 years after boycotting the elections since 2018. The process Sunday was observed by dozens of international monitors, mostly from the European Union, fulfilling a demand from the opposition. It marked the first time European Union monitors traveled to Venezuela in 15 years. This comes as Venezuela continues to face a brutal economic crisis exacerbated by U.S. sanctions, and its supporters of Maduro urge international forces to stop intervening in Venezuela. In Haiti, 2 of the 17 North American missionary hostages taken in October have been released. Few other details are known, but the Christian Aid Ministry says the 2 freed members are healthy and safe. A Haitian gang claimed responsibility for the kidnapping and has threatened to kill the hostages if their ransom is not paid. In Somalia, a prominent journalist has been killed by a suicide bomber in the capital, Mogadishu. Abdiaziz Mohamed Guled was the director of Radio Mogadishu and a critic of the al-Shabaab armed group, which claimed responsibility for the attack. Several others were also wounded, including the director of Somali National Television. The International Organization for Migration says 75 migrants drowned in the Mediterranean off the coast of Libya last week as they attempted to reach Italy by boat. They were among the more than 1,300 asylum seekers the UN says have died trying to cross the central Mediterranean this year. In Greece, a court on the island of Lesbos has postponed the trial of 24 humanitarian aid workers who face sentences of up to 25 years in prison if found guilty of espionage and other charges. The volunteers were arrested for helping asylum seekers who arrived on Lesbos by boat between 2016 and 18. Human rights groups say the charges are trumped up and aimed at deterring others from helping refugees in need. This is Peter Wittenberg, one of the 25 whose trial was delayed last week.
I am disappointed that we have not been able to speak and demonstrate once and for all today that humanitarian work is not a crime. That will have to wait.
Back in the United States, the House on Friday voted 220 to 213 to approve the roughly $2 trillion social and climate package known as the Build Back Better bill. The vote came after the Congressional Budget Office released its analysis of the measure, which was demanded by conservative Democrats. The legislation includes universal pre-K, subsidized child care, expanded financial aid for college, and 4 weeks paid family and medical leave. It also designates $555 billion to help combat the climate catastrophe. On the immigration front, it would give undocumented people who came to the U.S. over 10 years ago up to 10 years of work authorization through a process known as parole. The measure now heads to the Senate. And in labor news, janitors at Denver International Airport celebrated a historic victory Saturday after reaching an agreement that includes a $4 an hour pay increase over 3 years. The announcement came just hours after hundreds of custodial workers walked off the job in protest demanding fair pay and better working conditions. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. When we come back, protests have taken place across the country after a jury in Kenosha, Wisconsin, acquitted 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse on all 5 counts of fatally shooting 2 people to death and wounding a third during racial justice protests over the police shooting of Jacob Blake in Kenosha. In a Democracy Now! Exclusive, we'll speak to Jacob Blake's father and his uncle. Stay with us.
Thinking of tomorrow, but tomorrow never comes. I guess I'll be thinking of tomorrow until my life is done. Thinking of the day when I could be with you. I guess I'll be thinking of that day until my life is through. Sitting and waiting for the glorious day when I could hold you close and kiss you, pass the time away. Thinking of the moment when I could hold you tight, when I could kiss you in the morning.
Thinking of the day. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Protests have taken place across the country after a jury in Kenosha, Wisconsin, found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty on all 5 charges, including intentional homicide. Rittenhouse was on trial for fatally shooting 2 people and wounding a third last year during racial justice protests that began after police in Kenosha shot and paralyzed Jacob Blake. Kyle Rittenhouse, who was 17 at the time, claimed he acted in self-defense when he fatally shot Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum with an AR-15-style rifle. Rittenhouse took to the streets after a right-wing group had called for armed vigilantes to patrol Kenosha. The jury's decision was announced Friday afternoon after about 26 hours of deliberation.
The defendant will rise, face the jury, and hearken to its verdicts.
State of Wisconsin versus Kyle Rittenhouse. As to the first count of the information, Joseph Rosenbaum, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the second count of the information, Richard McGinnis, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the third count of the information, unknown male, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fourth count of the information, Anthony Huber, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty. As to the fifth count of the information, Gage Grosskreutz, we, the jury, find the defendant, Kyle H. Rittenhouse, not guilty.
Members of the jury, are these your unanimous verdicts? Is there anyone who does not agree with the verdicts as read? Would you wish the jury polled?
In a statement, the parents of Anthony Huber, one of the protesters killed by Rittenhouse, said they were heartbroken and angry, and that the verdict, quote, sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, then use the danger they've created to justify shooting people in the street. The jury's decision in the Kyle Rittenhouse case was widely decried by racial justice activists and many politicians. NAACP President Derek Johnson tweeted, "The verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial is a reminder of the treacherous role that white supremacy and privilege play within our justice system." California Governor Gavin Newsom tweeted, "America today, you can break the law, carry around weapons built for a military, shoot and kill people, and get away with it. That's the message we've just sent to armed vigilantes across the nation," California's governor said. Many right-wing politicians have hailed Kyle Rittenhouse as a hero. Republican Congressmember Madison Cawthorn of North Carolina has offered Rittenhouse an internship. In a video message, Cawthorn urged his Instagram followers to be armed and dangerous. Today, in a Democracy Now! Exclusive, we're joined by two guests who've closely followed the trial. Jacob Blake Sr. and Justin Blake, the father and uncle of Jacob Blake, the black man shot by Kenosha police, sparking protests in the city. On August 23, 2020, a white police officer fired 7 shots at point-blank range into the back of Jacob Blake as Blake leaned into his car. Inside the car were Jacob Blake's 3 sons, aged 3, 5, and 8. Jacob Blake is partially paralyzed. Jacob Blake's uncle Justin joins us from Milwaukee. He stood outside the courthouse every day during the Kyle Rittenhouse trial. And we're joined by Justin's father, by Jacob Blake's father, Jacob Blake Sr., who's joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Jacob Blake, let's begin with you. You're Jacob Blake's dad. You've spent a lot of time in Kenosha, not quite as much as Justin, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But can you talk about the verdict in this case, in the case of the young man, the teenager, armed with an AR-15, who shot to death 2 protesters who were in solidarity with your son, who was killed by who was shot 7 times in the back by a police officer?
Well, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I thank you again, Amy. We love your show. I love you. The verdict is a product of what I described to you the first time we spoke, the 2 systems of justice. The system of justice works if I look like Kyle Rittenhouse. It does not work if I look like Jacob Blake. The Families United organized all over the United States. And because of demographics, my brother, who is locally located in Wisconsin, took on the courthouse of Kyle Rittenhouse. I was in North Carolina with Cameron Lamb's family. Jolly Be Good was in Oklahoma with Julius Jones. We have another group that's going down to Georgia. So we understood what was going to happen in Wisconsin. So we understood what my brother's responsibility was going to be. And he took on that responsibility, and we got a victory in Kansas City, which we should be talking about more in the national news. Kansas City was momentous.
That conviction in a moment. That conviction of a white police officer for killing an African-American man.
147 years for killing Cameron Lamb. So we, as a group, have been all over the United States, standing with these families because of what we went through in Kenosha. So understanding that systematic racism is prevalent. We understood.
Have you talked to your son, Jacob? And what is his response to the verdict?
Jacob can speak for himself. And when he decides to come out and speak about it, he will speak on it.
How is he doing, Jacob?
From the time we spoke the first time, he's doing much better. He's doing much better. And we're praying every day that he will be able to walk again.
Justin Blake, you stood outside that courthouse every day. Yesterday, you led the protest. You were there along with the fiancé of Joseph Rosenbaum, who was one of the two men Kyle Rittenhouse killed that day. Talk about the significance of this verdict.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having us. This is a tragedy and a slap in the face to all the families that were involved. It made a mockery of the judicial system. It just broke the whole city and shattered in many, many pieces, not just through racial divides, but we work in an organization through LOC. Leaders of Kenosha has helped the Blake family throw over 80 events since we've been in Wisconsin and in Kenosha. This family, we were trying to support so they could focus on their families and what was going on in the courtroom. It's devastated the city. That nobody can believe it at all. It certainly sets terrible precedents that we would have allowed for the gun charge to be thrown out, that a 17-year-old kid should be able to carry around a military-style weapon in the midst of chaos. Right prior to this young man hitting the scene, they were peacefully protesting in Civic Park until they were blasted with rubber bullets, gas, and other projectiles, which forced them from Civic Park on to Sheridan. Then they forced them into what was almost like an OK Corral thing with the militias. They forced them down away from the Civic Park where they were peacefully protesting into the masses of the militias. So it was a terrible cocktail, and it just ended up even worse with this young kid who looked like he was 13 years old with his hat turned backwards. You could see from the video he was way over his head. It was like a deer in the headlights, and it was just a cocktail that was going to go wrong, and it did. It ended in the loss of life to the two young men who were supporting our nephew, Anthony and JoJo, and a severe injury of Gage.
We're going to speak with Anthony Huber's lawyer in our next segment. But, in fact, your nephew, Jacob Blake, knew Anthony. Is that right? Anthony is well known as a skateboarder in Kenosha and was celebrated in the skateboard park recently.
That's correct. He had some connection with Jake. They were friends. And this totally blew his mind, what he saw on TV. And his only reaction was to use his First Amendment rights to get out there in the streets and voice his opinion that this was a god-awful attack on little Jake that was shot 7 times in the back in front of his children and paralyzed by Officer Shesky, and nothing became of it. So he saw it as a brutal attack. His way to stand up for little Jake was to peacefully protest, and that led to the end of his life. So we can't allow the Second Amendment to hold the First Amendment hostage. We must continue to fight and get justice for these families as well as little Jake and families all around this nation.
Justin Blake, you've said that a lot didn't come out in the trial. I mean, among other things, we know that the, to say the least, very controversial judge in the case, Judge Schrader, said that the men who died, who were unarmed, could not be referred to as victims, but could be referred to as arsonists, looters, and rioters.
That's ridiculous.
Right. Well, not only that, there was a videotape that showed this young man saying he couldn't wait to shoot somebody and explain the type of weapon he was going to use to shoot somebody. And 30 to 40 days later, he murdered 2 people with the exact same gun that he was speaking about. He was in the bar throwing up Proud Boys signs after he murdered 2 people. There was no remorse. There was none on the stand. He said he had the right to defend himself. So this is the big push from that side to let them know they're standing on gun rights. But this wasn't a gun rights case. This was a murder case. So the outer stories tried to overtake it by saying it was a Second Amendment right. It wasn't that at all, because I'm a gun guy. So it wasn't about having guns. It was about the misuse of an illegal weapon by a 17-year-old that had no right to be there, and basically put these people in harm's way. He was flailing the gun around at like 8 or 10 other people, and then decided to murder these 2 young men.
Justin, you work with Reverend Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push Coalition. There was a release from that organization that said the Justice Department should also consider aiding and abetting charges for Rittenhouse's mother. Can you explain?
Well, listen, I'm from Chicago. If there's a drive-by shooting, everybody in the vehicle, including the driver, gets charged. So how could this lady possibly bring this young man across state lines and hasn't been charged with anything? And furthermore, our family's going to push that the head AG in D.C. pick up Little Jake's case, reopen it, review it, and get us justice. These should be, when there's problems in Mayberries around the United States, it's when the federal agent comes in and levels the ground for those minorities and those people that aren't being properly represented. So under a Democratic Party, we feel betrayed by President Biden and Sister Harris, Vice President Harris, the Floyd family, Bianca Austin, the auntie of Breonna Taylor, and Jacob Blake, my brother, go all around the country trying to do great work. But we put this president in office, and we feel terribly betrayed that Biden hasn't stepped forward and helped these families bring resolution to these severe injuries.
Jacob Blake Sr., you wanted to get in a word edgewise. If you'd like to respond to some of those points, and also to President Joe Biden, who I believe you met with, didn't you, at a certain point?
Right. I didn't talk to him on the phone. We met face to face. So some of these things that the president has promised it's not shown. It's not come to fruition. We sit around and we wait for him to do what he's supposed to do, and he did not. The DOJ turned down my son's right to be heard federally. They've already said no. So why would they say no?
To a federal civil rights investigation to the shooting of your police shooting of your son.
They said no. They wouldn't charge him. And what is wrong with America? What's going on that a judge in Kenosha, Wisconsin could so blatantly be on the side of Kyle Rittenhouse? Blatantly. Is he one of them? That's what it seemed like to us. It seemed like they were stacked. The cards were stacked against us.
I wanted to play the comments of President Biden. He followed the protests in Kenosha after the police shooting of Jacob Blake during his presidential campaign last year. This was President Biden responding to the Rittenhouse verdict on Friday.
Do you have any reaction to the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict?
I just heard a moment ago.
Do you have any reaction?
I didn't watch the trial, so
Do you stand by your past comment equating him to white supremacy?
Well, look, I stand by what the jury has concluded. The jury system works, and we have to abide by it.
Jacob Blake Sr., your response.
The jury system doesn't work. It may work for those that do not look like me. For my Caucasian counterparts, it works. When it comes to us, it doesn't work. It worked in Kansas City for the first time in 147 years. So do we have kibbles and bits? They throw us one because it was so blatant in Kansas City that the police, now they cannot tell me that the police do not tamper with evidence. They moved a dead body. They moved a gun, a weapon. They changed reports. It came all out in court. That sets precedent that that's what they do. And we're caught up in Kenosha when we should have all the national coverage for the Lamb family, for Cameron Lamb. We should have that national coverage because that's a victory. This here we knew was coming.
So
we knew it was coming.
Let me go to that case that you're talking about, that you've been following so closely, supporting the family and friends of Cameron Lamb.
I was in the courtroom.
And just to explain to people, he is a black man who was killed in Missouri by a white Kansas City police detective who was found guilty on Friday of fatally shooting Lamb outside his own home in December of 2019. Eric de Vulcaner was convicted on charges of second-degree involuntary manslaughter and armed criminal action for firing 2 rounds at 26-year-old Cameron Lamb, who was killed as he backed his truck into his own garage. At the time, the officers had no arrest warrant and no evidence of a crime. I want to play again civil rights attorney Lee Merritt representing Lamb's family.
This is momentous. This is historic, and it means something. This is going to mean something when you go back to Georgia. It's going to mean something for Ahmaud Arbery. It's going to mean something for Tatiana Jefferson. It's going to mean something for both of Jean. It's going to mean something for so many families that have been impacted. Jamel Roberson in Chicago, Ronald Green in Illinois. These instances of justice in our system are far too rare.
So if you can talk about why you were in the courtroom, why this case in particular was so important to you. Again, this police officer, this detective, was a white detective who has now been found guilty of murdering Colin Lamb.
Cameron Lamb's family reached out to me personally, and the Families United, along with the Justice Reform Group that we have established here to protect these families and stand up with these families, and invited me, wanted me to stand with them to give them strength because they needed to feel backed up. They needed to feel someone was behind them. So we showed up in the courtroom. And me and Lee, I was there with Lee, and Lee was back and forth from Georgia to Kansas City because Lee represents the family also. It was... of
Ahmaud
That's
Arbery.
why I was in the courtroom. Yeah. I mean, Lee Merritt was back and forth. Lee has more frequent flyer miles than me, and that's incredible.
I wanted to talk with you both. I mean, this is an exclusive interview, the two of you at the same time. We have Justin Blake in the studio.
That hasn't happened in a long time.
In Milwaukee. And we have Jacob Blake in the studio in Charlotte, North Carolina, where he lives. About your family's history, who Jacob Blake is named for, your son, Jacob Blake Sr., your father, both of your father, Jacob Blake Sr., the Reverend Jacob Blake, a civil rights activist in Evanston who led a movement for housing equality, worked with Dr. Martin Luther King. Can you talk about that history of activism through to what you both are doing today? Justin, why don't we begin with you?
Well, they don't understand that what got us up 9 in the morning every day or 8 o'clock to be on the courtroom steps is my great-grandfather on one side was a Garveyite. On my father's side, Marcus Garvey-Knight, UNIA. On the other side, my great-grandfather was a Pullman porter. We've been living in our house over 75 years because of my grandfather being a Pullman porter who purchased the house. So when you see Raising in the Sun, that's like our family. My grandfather was a Tuskegee Airman that helped train all the gentlemen that went over to fly in the war were trained by my grandfather. We have it in our DNA. We cannot sit down. We must make change. So our family, Jacob Blake, myself, and Bianca Austin and some members of the Floyd family want to be in every fight around this country that have anything to do with getting justice for our people.
And Jacob Blake Sr., your father, who you're named for, that housing militancy, activism as a reverend in Chicago, in Evanston, outside Chicago.
Well, my father was definitely, he marched from Selma to Montgomery, across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. He helped found Breadbasket with Jesse in Chicago. My great-grandfather, as my brother stated, was a Garveyite My other great-grandfather, not a porter, my great-grandfather was one of the first black Pullman conductors. So understanding that civil rights flows in our blood, it was only God that chose this to happen to my son. We were already speaking activism before this happened to my son. We were always pro-black activists. And then when this happened to my son, we became activists for everyone who's been affected. So it was only natural. What flows in your DNA comes out. And me and my brother, I would rather die fighting than be a slave.
And then you have your father, Reverend Jacob Blake, with the Reverend Eustace Blake, leading a protest against police brutality in Newark, New Jersey.
And there's a building in Newark, New Jersey today that is called the Blake House. It has a huge picture of my Uncle Eustace in it. When I was in college, I used to go to Newark, New Jersey just to hang out with my friends that went to college with me. And we would walk past that house and it said the Blake House, and they said, man, they would tease me, not knowing that that was really named after my family. So, yes, Newark, New Jersey plays a key role. Cory Booker's a dear friend. That's why we fight to change laws, Amy. We're not in this just to be walking, just to be protesting. Our objective is to get to Congress, change these laws. We're lobbying like everyone else because Black lives matter, because white lives matter. So if Black lives don't matter, then everything is thrown off kilter. There's no balance. We have to understand that Black people are just as important as my counterparts. We put in a lot of work, Amy. We're all over the country fighting for families. I'll be with Ahmaud Arbery's mother this week later on, waiting for the verdict, because we show unity. We show unity. We show direction. We will not be pushed off our path. We will stand strong on what this is built on, the foundation.
And your comment, Justin Blake, on this moment that your brother Jacob is talking about. You've got the white supremacy trial going on in Charlottesville. You've got the Ahmaud Arbery murder trial taking place. 3 white men are on trial. One of them is a former police officer and police investigator. And, of course, you have the case of Kyle Rittenhouse. Your thoughts at this key moment in time?
Well, it's time for us all to forge on. We, the Blake family, Bianca Austin, and Tez went down to the federal building in Chicago to stand with the Haitians when they were being abused on the border. We're going to bring about unity to our people. You must understand, we made this country the richest country in the world by 300 to 400 years of free slavery. If anybody deserves to vote, we deserve to vote. If anybody deserves civil rights and liberties, we deserve those civil rights and liberties. So we're going to unite the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, the African Americans, the Jamaicans, the Belizeans, and the Haitians all in one. And we won't have to ask for much. We'll be demanding our needs. We're in the midst of putting together our platform that we'll be operating on and our directives and what actually our ask will be. I don't think we've ever in the United States really done that before. We have to do that because that's the proper way to demand and to ask what you're looking to do and the changes. This system is broke And we all know that now. This was a good look at that through this case that we just followed the last couple of weeks. And we must do something about it. We have to be direct about it. If it's not good for us, it's not good for anybody else. And when the African American community is doing well, that city must be doing well, the county must be doing well, the state and the nation. So there doesn't have to be a win-loss scenario. We want to develop and let people know there can be a win-win scenario where we as the African American community do well. Where has the money been? Why does it always go to downtowns and not to the south side and to the west side of Chicago? Chicago, west side and south side looks like it did in '79. It's appalling. We cannot continue to do this. We deserve the resources that every other community gets. We pay the same taxes and we deserve the same treatment.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us. Justin Blake joining us from Milwaukee and Jacob Blake joining us from Charlotte, North Carolina, the father and uncle of Jacob Blake, the young black man shot by Kenosha police, sparking protests throughout Kenosha. I want to thank you so much for spending this time. Next up, we're going to speak to the lawyer representing the family of Anthony Huber, one of the two protesters shot dead by Kyle Rittenhouse. Stay with us.
Trouble, oh, trouble set me free. I have seen your face, and it's too much for me. Trouble, oh trouble, can't you see? You're eating my heart away, and there's nothing much left of me. I drank your wine, and you've made your world mine. So won't you be fair? So won't you be fair? I don't want no more of you. So won't you be kind to me? Just let me go where I have to go there. It's trouble, oh trouble, move away. I have seen your face, and it's too much for me today.
Trouble by Cat Stevens, Yusuf Islam, covered by Kristen Hirsch. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Kenosha, Wisconsin, Sunday, people took to the streets to protest the acquittal of Kyle Rittenhouse Friday and to remember his victims, chanting Anthony and JoJo, as they walked the same route Rittenhouse took when he shot and killed Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Huber and wounded Gage Grosskreutz during protests in August 2020 that followed the police shooting of Jacob Blake. Joseph Rosenbaum was the first person Rittenhouse shot with his AR-15 style rifle. Joseph Rosenbaum was 36 years old. He had been released that same day from a Milwaukee hospital where he had been treated for a suicide attempt. He was unarmed when he was shot by Rittenhouse. Rosenbaum was shot 4 times, first in the groin, then in the hand and thigh as he faced Rittenhouse, and then was shot in the head and in the back. After Rittenhouse killed Rosenbaum, several protesters who believe Rittenhouse was an active shooter began chasing him. 26-year-old Anthony Huber tried to disarm him by hitting him with what he had in his hand, his skateboard. Rittenhouse shot and killed him within seconds. Gage Grosskreutz was the only person who survived being shot by Rittenhouse. Anthony Huber's parents, Karen Bloom and John Huber, said they were heartbroken and angry over the verdict, which they said did not deliver justice for any of Rittenhouse's victims. This is Anthony Huber's father, John Huber, responding to the verdict on CNN.
We're still in shock here, you know. That guy gets to run free, and he's now a hero. And this is my son right here. This is Anthony, we lost our son. And there's no justice right now for our family, and there's no closure. And there wasn't going to be justice in that Kenosha court with that judge.
After Rittenhouse's acquittal, Anthony Huber's girlfriend, Hannah Giddings, who was with him the night of the protest, told reporters she wasn't surprised by the verdict, saying, quote, "We know that this system is a failure." This is Hannah speaking Friday outside the Kenosha courthouse.
I miss Anthony every single day. Every day I wish that I could come home to him and unload some of this weight that's on my shoulders. But I can't because he's dead. And now the system is telling me that nobody needs to answer for that. And I have a problem with that. I think I've been very open in expressing my empathy for the other side of this, but that's just not reciprocated back.
That's Hannah Giddings. She was standing next to Jacob Blake's uncle, Justin Blake. Anthony Huber's parents also released a statement after Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty, saying, "Make no mistake, our fight to hold those responsible for Anthony's death accountable continues in full force. Neither Mr. Rittenhouse nor the Kenosha police who authorized his bloody rampage will escape justice. Anthony will have his day in court," they said. There are now several civil lawsuits filed that are still pending. Huber's parents filed a federal lawsuit in August against the Kenosha Police Department, the Kenosha County Sheriff's Department, as well as the sheriff and police chief, that alleges they allowed Rittenhouse and others to, quote, "patrol the streets armed with deadly weapons to mete out justice as they saw fit," unquote. Grosskreutz has also filed a lawsuit alleging that Kenosha officials and law enforcement were aware of, supported, and collaborated with armed vigilantes on the night of the shooting. For more, we go to Chicago, where we're joined by Anand Swaminathan, an attorney representing the parents of Anthony Huber. Thank you so much for joining us, Anand. If you can respond to the verdict and talk about what we learned and what we didn't learn in this trial.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Amy. We just heard from Jacob Blake family, and I think one thing that's striking right away, of course, is their statement that they were not surprised at all by this verdict. And there are many people who have said, since this verdict came down, that they weren't surprised by the result. And that's, sort of, I think, something we all have to wrestle with. I mean, we're living in a society right now where so many people just knew in their heart of hearts that there would be no justice in this case, that there would be no accountability for Kyle Rittenhouse, and that is the system and the state of affairs that we're living in. And that's extremely problematic.
So why don't we start from the beginning, when the judge, to say the least, surprised many when he said that the victims of Rittenhouse could not be referred to, the men who were killed by Rittenhouse, Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum, could not be referred to as victims. But they could, if proven, be referred to as arsonists, looters, and rioters.
Yeah, I want to clear a couple things up there that are very important. One, there was no evidence ever presented at the trial to suggest that Mr. Huber was an arsonist or looter or anything else. And the judge said, if you can come up with that evidence, you may be able to present it. No such evidence was ever developed. So I want to be very clear about that. When it comes to the ruling that Rittenhouse could not be referred to, you can refer to Rittenhouse as victims, as in fact victims, I want to say this. First, they were absolutely victims. Anthony Huber, Gage Grosskreutz, and Joseph Rosenbaum were all victims of Kyle Rittenhouse. But for Kyle Rittenhouse's decision to come to Kenosha and come to Kenosha armed with a weapon of war, they would be alive today. Period. So yes, they absolutely were victims. Anthony Huber's mom and dad, Karen and John, absolutely believe their son was a victim of Kyle Rittenhouse. In terms of the judicial rulings, the evidentiary decision whether or not certain terms and terminology should be used in the courtroom, I I do want to have some caution on weighing in on that point, only because I don't want to be outcome determinative about what we think evidentiary rulings should be. Ultimately, I'm a civil rights lawyer, and many of us represent people who are accused, and we believe in the rights of the accused, and so we should be thoughtful about weighing in and sort of in an outcome determinative way about what we think evidentiary rulings should be. But that doesn't change the fact that absolutely these young men were victims of Kyle Rittenhouse.
So if you can tell us a little bit about Anthony Huber. I think one of the things that is very clear in this trial, we know about this young man. We watched him cry in the courtroom, Kyle Rittenhouse. We don't know about his victims. Tell us who Anthony Huber was. The Blakes, Jacob Blake's father and uncle, just said that he was a friend of Jacob Blake, who was shot by the police officer 7 times in the back. Why he came out that night, and then what happened?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, because it's a great point. I mean, the world didn't get to hear from Anthony Huber, and he didn't get the sort of due process that Kyle Rittenhouse got. He didn't get an opportunity to present his case, have jury instructions in his favor, and so on. He had judge, jury, and executioner. So thank you for that opportunity. Anthony Huber was loved. He was loved by his parents. He was loved by Hannah and many others. And many people have obviously know now the story of his involvement with skateboarding. He was a tremendous skateboarder. Those areas in Kenosha, downtown Kenosha, were his park. Those were his sort of community. That's where he spent so much time. And, the idea that he would be a person there for anything other than to show support for Jacob Blake, who it is correct that he knew, is simply wrong. Consistently, when we talk to people in the family about Anthony, what they say is he was an absolutely loving person, and he was loved by all those around him.
We were showing video of him skateboarding. And if you could talk about that night, in many circles, especially in Kenosha and the Black Lives Matter activists, they refer to him as a hero. He had already killed JoJo, that's Joseph Rosenbaum. He was not armed, Anthony Huber, but he went to take down this shooter, what he called, I think Grosskreutz called him an active shooter, which many people were running away. He was running towards him because he was afraid he would kill others.
Yeah. That's right. And as Anthony's parents have said repeatedly, what has happened in the aftermath of this incident, in some of the hateful, sort of demeaning comments that have been made to them over time, is very painful, because they know that in reality their son was a hero. When you have a dangerous situation, and Kyle Rittenhouse had created a severely dangerous situation, he created a powder keg situation, and he'd already killed a man. And many people ran away. And Anthony Huber stepped in to try to stop this person. And in almost any scenario, we call that person a hero. And in almost any scenario, we celebrate somebody who steps into danger to try to protect others. And because of the polarized nature and politics around this case, it's turned into something else entirely. But it should not be lost. Anthony Huber was absolutely a hero, as we all intend and mean that term.
His parents saying he's a hero who sacrificed his own life to protect other innocent civilians. The judge's cell phone went off during the trial, and it played a ringtone for the song God Bless the USA by Lee Greenwood, which is the opening song played at Donald Trump rallies. Do you feel this Judge Schrader, was impartial?
Well, I think it would not have mattered what happened in that courtroom in terms of judicial determinations and so on and evidentiary rulings. What ultimately you had here, and as the family said, we were not surprised, as Jacob Blake's family and others have said, we were not surprised. The problem is you cannot remove the context that surrounded a case like this. Ultimately you have a criminal justice process that resulted in a jury I think 19 out of the 20 people between the jurors and alternates were white. You have a situation in which the way the evidence is going to be perceived is itself impacted by race and other issues that play an impact. I mean, ultimately, I think there are many aspects of this case, and I'm very appreciative to the Blake family who you've interviewed earlier for all of their work organizing and being active to try to help people understand what goes on in these cases and what the injustice is here. But think about in this case, we cannot forget the racial context surrounding this case. First and foremost is I'm so glad you put the Blakes on, because of course the story of the Rittenhouse shooting and Anthony Huber's case ultimately starts with the shooting of Jacob Blake, an unarmed black man, and it ends with a white 17-year-old with an assault rifle shooting 3 people and literally walking away with the smoking gun in his hands. And the police, they don't just not shoot him, they just let him walk away. And so the juxtaposition of these sets of circumstances is stark, and it says something about this country. But that's not the only sort of racial context that exists here, as important as it is. The other one is, how does a jury perceive arguments of self-defense when they look at an individual and make these subjective assessments about whether or not you really perceived a threat, whether you were in fact yourself a threat, the extent to which we believe in your Second Amendment right to carry a gun or not. All of these things are impacted by race. The
and do you
idea
think
that a black man
this
could have walked
had
into
something
that
to
town
do with the
an
fact
assault rifle, created a menacing and dangerous situation, and then turn around and argue self-defense and say, hey, the dangerous situation that I created by showing up with an assault rifle,
Swaminathan, we have to leave it
using
there.
that
I
as a
thank you so
justification
much.
to shoot people.
Thanks for joining us.